Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we take a look at what will arguably be one of the most controversial panels this year, the panel on dismantling anti-Semitism and winning justice. But now, why would dismantling anti-Semitism be controversial, you say? Well, because it's not so much the topic of discussion that's up for criticism, but rather the choice of panelists, which includes Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Peter Beinart, Mark Lamont Hill, and Barbara Ransby, all of whom have themselves been accused more than once of anti-Semitism. Similarly, panel hosts including JVP and If Not Now have also come under fire for their policies and rhetoric with respect to Israel. But joining us now to discuss is National Co-Director for Code Pink, Ariel Gold, and Chen Mazig, Israel advocate and senior fellow for the Tel Aviv Institute. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now Chen, I'm actually going to start with you. You know, what is it exactly that you take issue with this panel?
Well, first of all, before I answer that, I just want to point out that it's very uncomfortable to be on a panel with Ariel Gold, a person that has been engaged in anti-Semitism, sharing a platform with someone that has traveled to Iran on a Iranian government-sponsored trip. The Iranian government, the genocidal country that hangs gay people. And just last week, Ariel Gold was on a panel with Angelo Gage, a known Holocaust denier and a white nationalist and a neo-Nazi and a homophobe. So it's, for me, as someone that white nationalism really threatened all that I am as a person of color and a Jew and a queer person, to be on a panel with someone like that, it's really uncomfortable.
I have to say that I'm happy that both of you are here, because I believe that an open debate is best regardless of people's views. But back to the question, Chen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always open to having discussions with people. Just, you know, there's some lines that I'm drawing. But anyway, I think that this panel is really problematic because it doesn't feature Jews, and it features people that have been accused of anti-Semitism. Several of them had to apologize for anti-Semitism. Mark Lamont Hill was fired from CNN for anti-Semitism. So to have a panel discussion of these people speaking about anti-Semitism or defining anti-Semitism for Jews, even though there is one Jewish person, Peter Beinart, an anti-Zionist that doesn't think Israel should exist as a Jewish state and represent less than 5% of American Jews. Even so, this is not really representative of the Jewish community. It's tokenizing the Jewish person and using him as a prop, while really engaging in a conversation on not how to dismantle anti-Semitism, rather than how to dismantle accusations of anti-Semitism.
So Ariel, I want to turn to you now. You know, more to Chen's point. You know, what makes these panelists the most qualified to dismantle anti-Semitism?
We here in America, over the past 4 years under Donald Trump, have been watching, witnessing, living through a horrific rise in anti-Semitism. And this hasn't occurred in a vacuum. It hasn't just been a rise of anti-Semitism. It's part of a rise in white nationalism. It's part of a rise in anti-Black racism, in Islamophobia, in anti-immigrant sentiment. And this, you cannot separate out anti-Semitism. If you do, you first of all do a disservice to anti-Semitism, because it's not occurring in a vacuum. It's part of this wider rise, and we need to bridge these struggles, and we need to struggle together in solidarity, because it is by protecting Black lives, it is by ensuring the rights of immigrants, it is by pushing back against Islamophobia that we ourselves as Jews are safer. And I want to point out that, you know, while this isn't new in America, it is spiking very much right now. And this is an experience that people who grow up in Israel from childhood don't have that same experience of sort of a daily acts of anti-Semitism, of encountering this in grade school, of
but Ariel, I have to press you on this. But Ariel, I have to press you because, you know, for example, I'll just take BDS for one point that is often touted as a positive by the members of this panel. You know, how can you get to what you're describing as everyone intersectionally caring about one another when you're effectively excluding a very large majority of the people whom this panel is saying that it wants to protect?
How would that be excluding people from this panel?
Well, when you're excluding people who are pro-Israel or Zionist, from the panel, or not giving them representation on a panel to discuss dismantling anti-Semitism, it seems a little like a disservice, no? Like you have a gap in the panel.
In debates about civil rights in the 1960s in America, and debates about Jim Crow, should we have given white nationalists a seat at the table?
Are you? I'm sorry. No. But hold on. Are you comparing Zionists to white nationalists? Because
I'm comparing an ethno-national state, and I'm saying that we don't always give a seat at the table to everybody. This is a discussion about framing anti-Semitism within the context of a global rise in fascism and racism.
With a neo-Nazi. Just last
to
week,
respond to that, Hen, I did not know who would be on the platform with me.
And you called him my colleague. That's your words. So don't come here and talk about white nationalism and neo-Nazis when you're sharing platforms with people like that. You just spoke with a neo-Nazi white nationalist that says that LGBTQ people are akin to pedophiles. You went to Iran when they had gay people, and you went on a sponsored trip of the same country that hangs gay people and oppress women. And you're here telling us that you care about white nationalism and you care about racism when you're just sharing platforms with those people. I think that you really, I don't think that you care about those issues. I think that you really want to harm Israel and harm Jews, so much so that you are willing to collaborate with neo-Nazis. And that's really problematic. I think you need to reflect on yourself and think, why are you doing that?
To ask Hen why you're not able to talk about anti-Semitism within the context of a broader rise in racism and fascism, why you're instead simply using this as an attempt to attack me rather than looking at the issue and making your points based on the issue.
No, because you made points and I replied to them. But I'll just say that I can do it, actually. And we are hosting a panel the day after on December 16 at 4 p.m. EST. You can find more information on event.combatantisemitism.com. And we're going to host. We have Rabbi Sandra Larson, that she's a Black rabbi. We have Representative Alma Hernandez, a Jew of color, a Mexican Jew. We have Marina Scheid, and we have Shage Herrero and myself, a group of Jews that will speak about this issue. And you're here justifying why we don't need to be heard and why this type of panel should not be that should be run by anti-Semites. Does it not sound off to you in any way?
Run by anti-Semites? Absolutely, that is not the case. This is a discussion, and you're welcome to have an additional panel.
Why did
Mark Lamont Hill was falsely accused of anti-Semitism, this is the danger.
It wasn't a false accusation. The accusation was against him for speaking at the United Nations and dog whistling from the river to the sea. Which, by the way, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib just recently deleted a tweet with that exact same dog whistle.
Let's be clear here. I don't find that phrase to be helpful, but let's be clear here that we know what Mark Lamont Hill meant when he used that phrase, and we know what Rashida Tlaib meant when she used that phrase. They are referring to equal rights, one person, one vote from the river to the sea.
Why did he say Palestine will be free? Why didn't he say a country for all people to live equally? Why did he advocate for an ethno-state? Palestine.
That's not advocating for an ethno-state, but there is, in fact, right now an ethno-state.
What is Palestine?
From the river to the sea. There is a state where 5 million people are denied their basic right to vote, do not have representation for the military that occupies them. That is actually an ethno-state, a country that has designed itself and reinforced itself as a state that privileged, please don't interrupt, that privileges Jews over other ethnic groups. That, in fact, is an ethno-state, and that is what needs to be addressed.
Well, Ariel, again, I mean, right now you're getting into issues of Israel policy and whether or not you agree or disagree with that, but anti-Zionism, for example, which again, you described Zionists earlier in a very unfavorable light, to put it mildly. The idea that a Jewish right to self-determine is somehow racist and then plays into other things. How are you going to dismantle anti-Semitism with views like that, with a panel of views like that?
So I am not denying Jews the right to self-determination, but that self-determination should not be based on the oppression of another people.
Well, but where in the definition of Zionism is it predicated on the oppression of another?
the practice currently, not in the definition as you put it, but the practice currently of Zionism
not my
in the
definition.
state
That's
of
the
Israel
definition.
denies equal rights to 5 million people living under its control. Now that in itself is problematic.
Well, okay. Well, so let's put it this way. Let's describe, and Chen, I'm going to start with you. What does it mean to dismantle anti-Semitism? Because that's ultimately the goal of the stated goal of this panel. So what does it mean to dismantle anti-Semitism? What is the end goal? What does success look like?
Well, first of all, to listen to Jews. I think Jews should be the one defining anti-Semitism. Just like as a gay person, I know that gay people should be the ones defining what is homophobic. Of course, in every community, you have a minority of voices that advocate against the well-being of this community. There's tokens in every community, but vast majority of Jews, 95% of American Jews, as I said before, are Zionists. And to say, I just feel like they're holding the stick in both hands. On the one hand, they're saying, oh, this panel is not about Israel. It's about dismantling anti-Semitism. And then you have organizations that the Jewish community has really condemned as a whole. Almost all of us really are disgusted by their operations, like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace, that has been engaging in anti-Semitism, that has been apologizing for white supremacists and promoting anti-Semitic tropes, like saying that the American police has learned racism from Israel, which is completely ridiculous. But this whole panel featuring people that have engaged in anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, having to speak and tell us, the Jewish community, over speaking on the Jewish community and explaining us what anti-Semitism is and isn't, is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to listen to Jews. And as I said before, we have an alternative panel the day after of real Jews of color, that are going to speak about anti-Semitism. And it's not, and you could have done it and not refer to Israel at all. This whole panel is about Israel. It's all anti-Zionists that are engaging in anti-Semitism, that are going to tell us that what they're doing is not anti-Semitic, and going to tell the 95% of American Jews that, according to every poll in the recent 10 years, have been Zionists, that they are wrong. And that's the problem that we're dealing with. And that's why I think Ariel is more concerned with Israel than she is with that will make American Jews afraid to go to temple or to sleep at night. She's talking here, and she's it's lip service on how she cares about white nationalists. But then, as I said before, like just a week, she was on a panel and calling a white supremacist a neo-Nazi her colleague.
Well,
I think that's really a compliment.
So Ariel, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, in that you called him a colleague to be respectful, and as you said, maybe didn't know who he was at the time.
Absolutely.
I'll give you the benefit of that doubt, but same question to you. What is the stated? What does success look like in the eyes of these panelists when it comes to dismantling anti-Semitism, especially in the United States? Through their efforts?
It looks like, so Hen spoke about tropes, and what we are witnessing in America absolutely is an explosion of anti-Semitic tropes, from saying that a caravan of immigrants is coming to the United States and that it's being funded by George Soros, to so much more. It's about looking at this rise in fascism and being able to actually address it. And to actually address it means looking at the intersectionality. And I want to tell just a slight story from my hometown. I'm here in Ithaca, New York, riding out the pandemic. And in the days leading up to the election, one of the leaders of my synagogue here locally had the sign outside her office defaced with Nazi symbols. And the sign that was defaced said said "End White Silence." So it was a yard sign addressing anti-Black hatred and the rise of white nationalism. And we see in this very moment these intersections between these forms of racism. And my particular town responded by purchasing hundreds of these yard signs and putting them in all of our yards. And this is the way that we need to address this horrific rise in fascism that, of course, includes anti-Semitism. And we should not be surprised at that. And we need to really be focused on these dangers and the ways that these forms of hatred and racism intersect. And that is what this panel will do. And I'm so excited to be to watch it take place and to be a part of the discussion about it.
So again, to press further though on that, you're talking about intersectionality oftentimes as it pertains to Israel and the conflict, the regional conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Now, again, how does intersectionality and comparing the issues of anti-Semitism to the issues of the Palestinian Authority or the conflict between the Palestinian Authority and Israel going to help, the anti-Semitic attacks against Haredim in New York? How does that translate from one to the other?
The panel is actually not about Israel. The panel is about dismantling anti-Semitism. But we are also witnessing a very dangerous conflation of support for Palestinian rights with anti-Semitism. And when we do this, when we say that the act of a nonviolent boycott is inherently anti-Semitic, we cheapen anti-Semitism. We cheapen the struggle, the necessary struggle, and we make it so much harder to recognize the real dangers of anti-Semitism as they continue to spike.
Well, but even the boycott, has been demonized across the board from both sides of the aisle, really in many parts of the world, especially in the United States and in Israel, as excluding the very people on the ground who are not policymakers in Israel and punishing them for the policies that you may or may not disagree with of the government. Isn't that true?
The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is a civil society-led nonviolent call. That's all that it is, and it's a set of tactics. Now, that's not to say that it ever hasn't, that nobody who supports the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement has ever
Well, but you're talking about being inclusive. How can you be inclusive when you're practicing a boycott?
Practicing a boycott? Boycotts are a long time tested peaceful means of change from apartheid South Africa to Jim Crow here in the United States, especially for Americans. They are part of a proud history.
But again, you're now conflating the conflict in Israel with Jim Crow South and apartheid South Africa, which
well, when you have two different walkways, one for Jews and one for Palestinians, like you do in Hebron, there's quite a simple comparison there to be made. When you have separate highways, one for Israelis and one for Palestinians, need I say more?
It's clear that Ariel hasn't been in Israel in a while. I know she's been denied entrance, and I think it's for the best now that we're speaking about it.
Are there no longer two different walkways in Hebron, one for Jews and one for Palestinians?
Ariel, I'm speaking. She's obviously not know what's going on in Israel, because this is ludicrous. According to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, everything that Ariel said is anti-Semitic. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and I don't think she can refute that. It's one thing to have a panel of diverse voices that are speaking about different topics and different issues, but she's talking here about how we're minimizing anti-Semitism, but that's what they're doing. They would have this panel about anti-Semitism in a different way if they really cared about anti-Semitism, but this is not the point of this panel. This panel is about dismantling any accusation of anti-Semitism and centering people like Rashida Tlaib, that, as you mentioned, had to erase tweets that were anti-Semitic, people that had to apologize for anti-Semitism, and centering them as if they are expert. They are anti. That's an angle for this people that what is not is very. It makes sense that someone like Ariel, she said that she didn't know who this guy, only engaged with Holocaust deniers and neo-Nazis. She went to met Holocaust deniers there. It's not the first time she's doing it. She knows exactly what she's doing, but she cares about harming Israel more than she cares about Jewish lives.
Ariel?
Yes?
Would you care to respond?
I think she agrees.
Hen, you have exactly made the point when you spoke about the definition of anti-Semitism that's being adopted by the U.S. State Department, and that Israel has
That's the international.
This is a definition that weakens our ability to recognize anti-Semitism and to root it out.
How does the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition weaken the ability to root out anti-Semitism?
Because this definition includes examples which are false flags of anti-Semitism.
Like what?
These examples provide the opportunity to make false accusations of anti-Semitism.
Can you provide an example?
Of what those examples are?
In what way does the IHRA promote anti-Semitism and their definition of anti-Semitism? How does that promote anti-Semitism?
Because it conflates Israel with Judaism. It assumes, first of all, that all Jews are Zionists, that all Jews live in Israel, and says that by denying, excuse me, it says that criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic, which of course it is absolutely not inherently anti-Semitic.
But it doesn't do that.
And
It points out that the double standard against Israel, that holding Israel to a double standard is anti-Semitic. It doesn't say that any criticism of the Israeli government is anti-Semitic.
And that's exactly my point, because Israel is held to a different standard than other countries. Israel receives the largest amount of U.S. military assistance from the United States. Israel receives cover diplomatically in the United Nations. Israel is held to a different standard. And what we actually need is Israel to be held to international law and to basic standards for human rights.
Chen, your response?
Yeah, no, I think it's you got your answer. Ariel is against the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. She's working with neo-Nazis. She's speaking on panels with neo-Nazis. She's with Holocaust deniers. She visited Iranian and Iranian sponsorship. I don't want to repeat all of that, but that really shows you who this person is. And she is defending this panel of anti-Semites, of people that have no issue on talking. It's really, they have no damn business telling Jews what is anti-Semitic and what isn't. I would actually listen to a panel with Ariel, and I'll give her more, although I'll disagree with everything she'll say probably, I will listen to her rather than listening to non-Jewish anti-Semites that were fired, that had to apologize for anti-Semitism, speaking to us, so, you know, not listening to the Jewish community. And the way to do a panel about dismantling anti-Semitism is either having non-Jews that are experts on combating anti-Semitism or scholars on combating anti-Semitism, then I'll be all for it, or having Jews speaking. And that's what we're going to do on December 16 at 4 p.m. With Combat Anti-Semitism.
All right, well, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you again, Chen and Ariel. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your days to be on this program. And tune in next time, everybody watching at home, on Insider for more in-depth analysis on everything Israel. Also, if there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know in the comment sections online. And finally, remember that for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV channels. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.